It was a wild bit of coast, the rocks steep and jagged. After they had been climbing for a bit, they found themselves on a narrow ledge above the sea, with a sheer rock wall on one side and a steep drop to the sea on the other. "Are you too frightened to go any farther?" asked the silk monkey, who found all this very easy, having 4 legs herself. "I'm never afraid," answered Sniff, "but I think the view is better from here." The silk monkey grinned jeeringly and pranced off with her tail in the air. After a time, Sniff heard her laugh. "Hello," she shouted, "I've found a house for myself. Not a bad house, either." Sniff hesitated a moment, but he couldn't resist the thought of the house. He had always loved houses in unusual places, so he shut his eyes tightly and set off along the ledge. The spray drenched him several times, and he offered up a prayer to the protector of all small beasts. Never in his life had he been so frightened or felt so brave as he did, creeping along that ledge. Suddenly, he tripped over the silk monkey's tail and opened his eyes. She was lying on her tummy, with her head stuck into a hole in the rock, talking and laughing 19 to the dozen. "Well," said Sniff, "where's this house you were talking about?" "In here," screeched the silk monkey, and she disappeared completely into the rock. Then Sniff saw that it was a cave, a real cave, such as he had always dreamed of finding. Its mouth was rather small, but inside it opened out into a big room. The rocky walls rose smoothly up to a gap in the roof, which let in the sunlight, and the floor was covered with smooth white sand. The silk monkey scuttled off to a cranny in one corner of the cave and started to sniff and poke at the sand. "There may be a lot of crabs here," she cried. "Come and help me look." "Don't disturb me," said Sniff solemnly. "This is the biggest moment of my life so far, and it's my first cave." He smoothed the sand with his tail and sighed. "I shall live here forever," he thought. "I shall put up little shelves and dig a sleeping hole in the sand and have a lamp burning in the evenings. And perhaps I'll make a rope ladder that I can go up to the roof and look at the sea. Moomin Ch1 will be surprised." And then he suddenly remembered Moomin Ch1's pearl fishing and the box. "I say, Silk Monkey," he said, "what about that box? Do you think Moomin Ch1 really needs it?" "What box?" asked the Silk Monkey, whose memory was exceedingly short. "Come on, I think it's beginning to get boring here." And in a twinkling she was out of the cave, back along the ledge, and down on the sand again. Sniff followed slowly. Several times he turned round and looked back at the cave proudly. He was so full of it that he quite forgot to be afraid on the dangerous ledge, and he was still deep in thought as he trudged along the beach to the place where they had left Moomin Ch1 pearl fishing. There was already a row of shining pearls, and out in the breakers Moomin Ch1 was bobbing up and down like a cork, while the Silk Monkey sat on the sand, busily scratching herself. "I am the treasurer," she said importantly. "Now, I've counted these pearls 5 times, and each time it comes to a different answer. Isn't that extraordinary?" Moomin Ch1 waded out of the water with his arms full of oysters. He even had several on his tail. "Whew," he said, shaking the seaweed out of his eyes. "That'll do for today. Where's that box?" "There weren't so very many good boxes on this beach," said Sniff, "but I've made a great discovery." "What was that?" asked Moomin Ch1, for a discovery, next to mysterious paths, bathing, and secrets, was what he liked most of all. Sniff paused and then said dramatically, "A cave!" "A real cave?" asked Moomin Ch1, "with a hole to creep in through, and rocky walls, and a sandy floor?" "Everything," answered Sniff proudly. "A real cave that I found myself." He winked at the Silk Monkey, but she was counting the pearls for the 8th time and wasn't bothering herself about the cave anymore. "That's splendid," said Moomin Ch1. "Wonderful news. A cave is much better than a box. We'll take the pearls there at once." "That's just what I had thought of doing myself," said Sniff. So they carried the pearls to the cave and arranged them neatly on the floor, and then lay down on their backs, looking up at the sky through the gap in the roof. "Do you know something?" said Moomin Troll. "If you fly hundreds and hundreds of miles up into the sky, you come to where it isn't blue anymore. It's quite black. In the daytime, too." "Why's that?" asked Sniff. "It just is," answered Moomin Troll. "And up there in the dark are great sky monsters, such as scorpions, bears, and rams." "Are they dangerous?" asked Sniff. "Not to us," replied Moomin Troll. "They only snap up a few stars now and again." Sniff pondered this deeply, and after a while they stopped talking and just lay watching the sunlight that poured through the roof creep over the sand and shine on Moomin Troll's pearls. It was late in the evening when Moomin Troll and Sniff got back to the blue house in the valley. The river flowed with hardly a ripple under the bridge, which showed up vividly in its new coat of paint, and Moomin Mama was arranging shells round the flower beds. "We've had supper," she said. "You better see what you can find in the larder, my dears." Moomin Troll was hopping with excitement. "We've been at least 100 miles from here," he said. "We followed a mysterious path, and I found something terribly valuable that begins with P and ends with L, but I can't tell you what it is because I'm bound by a swear." "And I found something that begins with C and ends with E," squeaked Sniff. "And somewhere in the middle there's an A and a V, but I won't say any more." "Well," said Moomin Mama, "fancy that, 2 big discoveries in one day. Now run and get your supper, dears. The soup is keeping hot on the stove. And don't clatter about too much, because Papa is writing." And she went on laying out shells, 1 blue, 2 white, a red, in turns, and it looked very fine indeed. She whistled quietly to herself and thought there was a rain in the air. Moomin Trolls can't sing or hum, but they whistle beautifully. A wind was getting up, and now and again a strong gust shook the trees, turning their leaves inside out, and Moomin Mama noticed an army of clouds massing on the horizon and beginning to march up the sky. "I do hope there isn't going to be another flood," she thought, picking up some shells that were left over, and going into the house as the first drops of rains began to fall. In the kitchen she found Moomin Troll and Sniff curled up together in a corner, tired out by their adventures. She spread a blanket over them and sat down by the window to darn Moomin Papa's socks. The rain was pattering on the roof and rustling outside, while far away it dripped into Sniff's cave, and deep in the forest the silk monkey crept farther down into her hollow tree and folded her tail round her neck to keep warm. Late that night, when everybody had gone to bed, Moomin Papa heard a plaintive noise. He sat up and listened. The rain gushed down the drain pipes, and somewhere a shutter banged in the wind. Then came the pitiful sound again. He put on his dressing gown and went to have a look round the house. He looked into the sky-blue room, into the sun-yellow one, and into the spotted one, and everywhere it was silent. At last he drew the heavy bolt of the door and looked out in the rain. His torch lit up a strip of the path, and raindrops glittered like diamonds in the light. "What in the world have we here?" exclaimed Moomin Papa, for on the steps sat something wet and miserable with shiny black eyes. "I am the muskrat," said the wretched creature faintly. "A philosopher, you know. I should just like to point out that your bridge-building activities have completely ruined my house on the riverbank, and although ultimately it doesn't matter what happens, I must say even a philosopher does not care for being soaked to the skin." "I am most extremely sorry," said Moomin Papa. "I had no idea you lived under the bridge. Please do come in. I'm sure my wife can make up a bed for you." "I'm not a great one for beds," said the muskrat. "They are unnecessary furniture, really. It was only a hole I lived in, but I was happy there. Of course, it's all the same to a philosopher, whether he is happy or not, but it was a good hole." After these words, which were not intended to be ungracious, he managed to gather enough energy and enthusiasm to go into the house, where he shook the water off him and said, "What an extraordinary house this is!" "It's a Moomin house," said Moomin Papa, who realized that he was talking to an extraordinary person. "I built it myself in another place, but it floated here in a great flood we had some months ago. I hope you will be happy here. I find it a very good place to work in." "I can work anywhere," said the muskrat. "It's all a matter of thinking. I sit down and think about how unnecessary everything is." "Really?" said Moomin Papa, much impressed. "Perhaps I might offer you a glass of wine against the cold?" "Wine, I am bound to say, is unnecessary," replied the muskrat, "but a small drop, nevertheless, would not be unwelcome." So Moomin Papa stole into the kitchen and opened the wine cupboard in the dark. He was stretching up for a bottle of palm tree wine on the top shelf, stretching and stretching, when all at once there was a terrible crash. He had knocked over a vegetable dish. In a moment the house came to life. People shouted and banged doors, and Moomin Mama came running downstairs with a candle in her paw. "Oh, it's you," she said. "I thought someone must have broken in." "I wanted to get the palm tree wine down," said Moomin Papa, "and some silly fool had put that stupid vegetable dish right on the edge of the shelf." "Never mind," said Moomin Mama. "It's really a good thing it's broken. It was so ugly. Climb up on a stool, dear. It will be easier." So Moomin Papa climbed up on a stool and got down the bottle and 3 glasses. "Who is the third one for?" asked Moomin Mama. "The muskrat," answered Moomin Papa. "A great man. He's coming to live here, with your approval, my dear." And he called the muskrat in and introduced him to Moomin Mama. Then they sat on the veranda and drank to each other's health, and Moomin and Sniff were allowed down too, although it was the middle of the night. It was still raining, and the wind had got trapped in the chimney and was howling eerily. "I have lived on this river my whole life," said the muskrat, "and never have I seen such weather. Not that it makes any difference to me, of course, except for giving me something new to think about. It would be much better if it rained in the hot, dried-up valley on the other side of the mountains. We don't need rain here with the heavy dew we get every morning." "How do you know what it's like on the other side of the mountains, if you've lived here all your life?" Uncle Muskrat asked Sniff. "An otter who swam down here once told me," answered the muskrat. "I never make unnecessary journeys myself." "I love making journeys," cried Moomin Troll. "There are hardly any unnecessary things, I think, only eating porridge and washing." "Hush, child," said Moomin Mama. "The muskrat is a wise man who knows about everything and why it is unnecessary. I only hope, as I said, that there isn't going to be another flood." "Who knows?" said the muskrat. "There has certainly been something strange in the air lately. I have had a vague forebodings and thought more than usual." "It's all the same to me what happens, but one thing is certain, that something is going to happen." "Something awful?" asked Sniff, pulling his nightshirt tighter around him. "One never knows," said the muskrat. "Now we'll all go to bed," said Moomin Mama. "It's not good for children to hear frightening stories at night." So they all crept into their own corners and went to sleep. But in the morning the rain clouds were still marching over the sky, and the lonely wind howled through the blue trees.